Art, managing director at Vana. He's going to be talking about it and also about the flavor profile of the coffee, something like this.
So, that just killed my punchline. Usually when people ask founders to speak at these events, you typically expect me to shill my project. But today I actually wanted to talk about something a little bit more important than that. It's something that affects everyone, well, a lot of people every day. They say it drives Web3. They say it is incredibly important for the productivity of projects. And that thing that I wanted to talk about today is a nice cup of coffee. So bear with me. Coffee has a very unique property, which is that its flavor for some people needs to be very specific. Who here has drunk a cup of coffee today? And who here likes their coffee to taste really, really good? I'm Australian, so we are very much coffee snobs. And so therefore, this story starts with a story about coffee. So this handsome devil is me a long time ago. And that is me in the hills on the borderland of Colombia and Ecuador. At the time, so this isn't just me backpacking like a crazy hippie, I also do actual work. So at the time I was studying at Harvard, and I was also working as a researcher for the Harvard Belfer Center. And as a Harvard institute, you get a lot of money from big corporates to do some really cool stuff. And so I was working for a large coffee conglomerate to do one thing, and it was to assess the impact of every dollar that they spent in the coffee supply chain. Okay? That wasn't just a corporate social responsibility thing. That was actually critical to their business because, as I mentioned earlier, some people really care about the flavor of their coffee. And so these guys spend millions of dollars making sure that their coffee supply chains are secure. So my job was to develop a model that predicted how much money they would need to spend in their supply chain in order to maintain their coffee flavor profile. And so I went to this place here. It is on the border of Colombia and Ecuador. It's called Nariño. It was beautiful. Incidentally, it's where they also grow a little bit of the stuff. Pretty cool. But I spent some time here to try to develop a model, interviewing a bunch of farmers to gather as much data as possible from them. I would do these interviews every single day. I'd do about 10 to 15 of these interviews where I'd sit down with them and I'd ask them about how much money they earned with crops, what they used that money on, where their kids went to school, to try to assess the social impact of every dollar spent to inform my model. And so I would do these every day. I would come home and I would look at my data and try to sketch out the parameters of the model. And the data was junk. Because if you ask someone, if I asked you today what you spent your money on 6 months ago, or if I asked you today how much money you earned 5 years ago, you're not going to be able to tell me that. And so here I was trying to sketch out my model, and I had no data that could go into it. And so I was pretty distraught because my project was dying in front of me. And then one evening at a dinner table, so I was living at the time with a family there. And one evening at the dinner table, I saw my host mum just pinging out on her phone. I was like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "I'm on Facebook." And I asked her, "What are you doing on Facebook?" And she's like, "Well, I'm talking to my friends." And I said, "About what?" And she said, "We talk about the yield, we talk about the groceries we buy, we talk about the crops, we talk about all of the farming equipment." And I stopped and I thought, this is the data. This data that she's sharing just with the world is the data that I needed for my model. And it was one of those epiphanies where I realized that this wasn't just her talking out in the world. This was capturing who she was, the type of person that she was, the trends that she was susceptible to. And then I started to think about this at a grander scale. Everyone has a story. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, you are writing your story in data. So everyone just do an exercise for me. Pull out your phone and check for me the messaging app that you most use, right? So take a look at, is it Telegram, is it WhatsApp or whatever? Just pull out your phone and take a look, scroll through those messages. If I was to look at that, what would I know about you? What would I know about what you buy? What would I know about who you are? What would I know about your personality? I'd probably know a lot. And then if you aggregate that amongst hundreds, millions, billions of people, you end up with a model of human behavior that's incredibly powerful. And therein lies the biggest lie that we have been told in our generation. And it's that the use of this technology creates a byproduct, and that byproduct is data. Data is not a byproduct. Data is incredibly powerful. Data is what goes to fuel the AI systems and models that we've created today, and that data is your data, and you are here treating it as if it's junk. And that is the biggest con that we've had in our generation, and it's the biggest con that will go to influence the future of data and future of AI as we know it. So that's why we started Vana. It's a really simple concept. So the power that these big tech platforms have is actually a very simple power. It's the ability to bring your data together, to structure it, to aggregate it, and to verify that it's good. But if you think about it, we can do all of that on the chain. We can aggregate data collectively. We can trust the trustless. And we can issue incentives and look at where our data's gone by just checking the block explorer. We have the ability to do what big tech platforms do with our data without them. And what happens when we do that? We start to own the economic system that will power AI for tomorrow. So here it is in a nutshell. You own your data. You decide where that data is stored because Vana is storage agnostic. Then when you want to contribute your data to a data set, it goes through a trusted environment to verify the data. The DataDAOs or the data collectives will define what we call proof of contribution, which basically says this data is good, and in exchange for your data being added to the data set, you'll get a VRC-20 token, which is our data-backed token standard. If somebody wants to access now the data set, which is now aggregated and valuable, they need to buy and burn the VRC-20 token. What that does is it ties the value of the data set to the value of its utility. What it does is it also allows people to access that data without having to go through the big tech platforms, and it allows the user to be part of a new economic system. And that in a nutshell is what Vana is. It allows you to own your own data because you can decentrally aggregate that data, and you can participate in an economy that has never existed before. An economy that is incredibly powerful. So how's it going? So yes, we did do our TGE in December. You didn't see it, I'm sorry, so sad. 1 million contributors on the platform who've contributed to 30 plus DataDAOs. We have about 12.5 million data points now on the network, so people who've added their data sets to Vana. And 2 of the DataDAOs have entered into multi-million-dollar data aggregation deals or data sales. This is only the tip of the iceberg. We're starting to see the emergence of really cool data sets being aggregated. Anything from social media data, so TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp, Telegram, all of that stuff, to health data. So people's health tracking data, there's a cancer data DAO, there's a women's health data DAO. We're starting to see the emergence of this property of, if I think this data is powerful, I'm going to start a data DAO on Vana, and that's exactly what we want to see. User-owned, community-driven data sets that can be used in the new AI economy. I know you're all here for alpha, so I'm going to drop some because that's what we want. A couple of cool alpha points for Vana right now. We have entered into one of the largest decentralized AI partnerships with a Web2 company called Flower AI. They run 20,000 decentralized AI nodes, and they're collaborating with 4 of our DataDAOs and Vana to be able to create Collective One, which is the first user-owned foundation model. So imagine something like Llama or any other foundation model, except it's now trained on proprietary user data that each of the users now own, where you can participate in that model. And all you have to do is to participate in DataDAO on Vana to be part of the collective one model. So that's really cool, and the idea is to scale that up to have 10 million users using that model, 10 million users contributing data to that model. The other really cool thing, which is alpha, is we have started to enter into partnerships with sovereign bodies and financial institutions to really standardize the VRC-20 standard as a data-backed financial asset. So imagine a future in which you can then invest in data tokens, you can invest and create derivatives of these data standards, and thinking through how that would affect the world in which data is consumed by AI so much, and the amount of financial return that you can get on that. We are partnering with several institutions and think tanks to start to create this framework which bridges Web 2 and Web 3, in which we can start to create standards and assets with our data tokens. And that actually takes me back to something that I wanted to zoom out a little bit on. This is a wonderful piece of art from a famous French artist. I have no idea what his name is, don't ask me. But it shows a time when land wasn't owned by the people. When the thought of being able to own your land, to lease your land, to have a mortgage over your land, to securitize your land was foreign, alien. That is where we are in terms of data today. What changed in this picture was that we took ownership of land away from feudal lords. We developed an entire financial system that built off this land and formed the foundation of modern capitalism. There is a revolution going on in relation to AI, and it is this playing out in motion, where the capital in AI is our data, and we need to start to own this and start to create new financial derivatives based on this important asset in a world of generative AI that needs to exist, or else we're going to be stuck in feudalism, stuck in these days. So the question is not whether or not your data is powerful. The question, we already know that. The question is not whether your data is worth something. It is. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry around. We know that. The question for you all is, who owns that power? Who owns that capital? And if it's not you today, we need to do something to change that. Enter Vana. Please ask any questions that you have. Thank you. Questions? So the question was, how do we evaluate the data quality contributed to by the users? Let me just quickly go back to this slide. So each DataDAO, because if you're trying to evaluate the data quality of, say, images, hilariously, there's a feed pics DataDAO on Vana because people like aggregating feed pics for some reason. I don't know why. And then you're trying to compare that to aggregating, say, WhatsApp messages, two very different data types. So each DataDAO, because they're dealing with such different data, defines their own proof of contribution. And that's basically Python code that proves that the data is valuable in some way. We're doing some experimentation on model influence functions as well, so you can programmatically value the data in that way. And that's run within the decentralized validated network. So DataDAO sets the standards. Those standards are then run against your data. If your data passes, your data then gets contributed to the DataDAO. So each DataDAO sets their specific standards. Now you could be asking, well, what if they set a really shitty standard, right? We have an adversarial system. So if you've got one Twitter DataDAO that says, okay, we're going to have a really shitty standard, you get a shitty data set. And then you get another Twitter DataDAO that comes in and they're like, we're going to set a really high standard, you get a really good data set. Now, if you're this person here and you're going to buy one of those Twitter data sets, which one are you going to buy? You're going to buy the really good one. And so that creates the economic models that will drive data quality in the ecosystem. Any follow-up questions or any other questions? Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what kind of tools do we have to evaluate the data set? Are you asking in terms of evaluating a single data point or the overall data set? So that's where the query engine comes in. I didn't focus in on this part, but there's a set of queries that you can run on the data set, including aggregate data, so basic population stats on the data, looking at just graphs of variability in the data set, looking at distributions of the data. You would run a simple function which would query some of those kinds of indicators, depending on what the data set is, and then you could actually run your operation, which could be train. So there's a series of operations you can run in this environment that would allow you to validate the data quality before actually entering into the purchase. Yes, so this entire query engine is part of the protocol. So we define the functions that you can use, functions that you can execute on the data. For now, they're a restricted set of functions. In future, we could allow the community to contribute or to vote in terms of what those functions would be. Good question. We haven't set a standard for governance for the DataDAOs because some of them are governed in very different ways. I'll give you an example. So the Telegram DataDAO, users who participate in that one know that their data can be bought and sold by anyone who holds a token. They don't necessarily get governance tokens for contributing their data, they get the financial upside. Another DataDAO, which is the Cancer DataDAO, they want to control that data. It's very, very personal to them. So they've set up a governance standard where holding the token actually entitles you to govern and vote on that data set. It's a Cancer DAO token, so these VRC-20 tokens are specific to the data sets, and that's really important because if you're trying to invest in a data set, you kind of want to invest in a specific one. You don't want to invest in, well, I guess you could invest in an index, but most people want specificity in that investment because, you know, is Cancer data more valuable than Facebook data? You want to be able to make that bet independently of one another. Liquid. So all of the tokens for the VRC-20 standard have to be liquid, but they can allocate distribution in such a way that would increase the distribution towards the data contributors. That could theoretically somewhat protect it from a governance perspective, but the 51% attack does exist. You're right. Thank you for the questions. Very good. Anyone else? No? You could take away one thing from this. It's, I love coffee. If you could take away two things from this, it's, I love coffee and I love data. So please come and talk to me if you've got any questions. Thank you very much, guys.